This week on Brian Ross Investigates, anchors amuck, scandal in the U.S. Navy, hookers, payoffs, and top admirals, all the work of one man called Fat Leonard.
Fat Leonard has pleaded guilty to corrupting the U.S. Navy and creating a mafia-like organization inside the Navy.
But now Fat Leonard is speaking out, claiming a cover-up to protect even higher-level admirals and officials.
They didn't want a clean house. They just wanted to, shove this all under the carpet. Let me take the blame and a couple of other bad apples.
And he trusted only one reporter to tell his story, and he's with us tonight.
And as you know, it's unprecedented for people who have plea deals with the U.S. government to talk like this. Very, very, very strange.
Plus,
the attack appears time for maximum impact.
Hundreds injured, 17 left as amputees, 3 dead. Now the Supreme Court will decide if the Boston Marathon bomber, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, should face the death penalty, as a jury decided.
I really think it was the demeanor of Dzhokhar himself in court. He hardly expressed remorse.
A court overturned the jury's sentence, but now government lawyers tell the court he should be put to death.
President Biden is the first president to have said that he opposes the death penalty, and it seems contradictory for his Justice Department to be pursuing its own appeal of a death sentence that was overturned.
And this week's winners and losers in the media, as chosen by the editors of Mediaite. See if you agree. From the Law&Crime Trial Network, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to our friends on Facebook Live. I'm Brian Ross, joined as always by my colleague here at Law&Crime, Rhonda Schwartz. And Rhonda, we begin with a huge corruption scandal that few people have ever heard of. It involves the U.S. Navy, top admirals, and a man by the name of Fat Leonard, who used hookers, cash, and his charm to win millions of dollars in Navy contracts in ports across the Pacific, Rhonda.
His full name is Leonard Glenn Francis, a 350-pound Malaysian man whose scheme thrived for nearly a decade until U.S. prosecutors finally caught him in a sting. He recently pleaded guilty, becoming a star witness against Navy brass, and now he's speaking out in a new podcast series by the only journalist he trusted to tell his story.
And we're joined now by Tom Wright, the former Wall Street Journal reporter and author, who really broke the story of Fat Leonard. And Tom, thanks so much for being here. How did you get him to talk to you after your tough investigative reporting?
Well, it's an extraordinary situation, Brian. I mean, Fat Leonard has pleaded guilty to corrupting the U.S. Navy, creating a mafia-like organization inside the Navy. Partly what's going on here is he believes there's been a cover-up in the U.S. Navy. And a lot of the information that he gave to investigators about admirals that dealt with him wasn't acted upon in his view. And that's one of the reasons that he talked.
Initially, I was the bad guy. I was Mr. Bad. Look at what you did. It was all my fault. But as the case rolled forward, and the Navy was like pushing back because they didn't want a clean house. They just wanted to shove this all under the carpet. Let me take the blame and a couple of other bad apples, 3 or 4.
The other is that he's got kidney cancer, late stage, and so he's very sick. And I think that also spurred him to really spill the beans on this extraordinary story.
It's huge risk for me to, do what I'm doing, but I'm so upset with it. Well, I'm portrayed as the bad guy when I wasn't the bad guy. I did everything that they wanted me to do. I've lived my life. I've been up just close to heaven and down to hell. I've seen it all. So my legacy is important too. We're all going to die one day. And I only fear God. I don't fear nobody else.
And the story that's been out there is that he corrupted a few Navy officers with prostitutes, vacations, handbags for their wives, that kind of thing, in return for very, very, very large contracts to protect the Navy, to provide food and fuel and security to the ships. But, as I investigated more, and it isn't just talking to Leonard, this podcast, it's, multiple sources, But Leonard was actually an integral part of the Navy for 25 years. He protected the Navy after September the 11th with a product called the Ring of Steel, which were steel barges around the aircraft carriers.
The ring of steel is the barriers, the steel barriers that protects the ships from a shipborne attack, like what happened to the coal.
He was a bagman for the Navy. He opened up ports in various places in Asia where you have to pay off people to be able to get in. And that's the dirty secret of naval operations. You need someone like Leonard.
The entire command, the chain of command, the command and control had to be in your pocket. And that's what happened. Everybody was in my pocket. I had them in my palm. I was just rolling them around. And then I could just move the carriers like, paper ships in the water, nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, strike groups. And I could put them in anywhere I wanted them to go.
So he was extremely, extremely useful to the Navy, as well as corrupting.
So this says a lot about the U.S. Navy.
Well, yes, when they wanted to take the USS Nimitz, at the time the world's largest aircraft carrier, into India to send a signal to China that the US was really, the most powerful Navy in the Indian Ocean, they relied on Leonard to come from Singapore, miles and miles away, to bring ships to support that visit. And so Leonard was, he was an operator, but he also, there's a quote from him in the podcast where he says, "I played professional and I played sexual. Anything you want, I did it."
I played professional, I played sexual, whatever you needed, anything.
One of the most amazing parts of this story, which is a huge national security failure by the US, that again, I don't think has been fully understood, is that Leonard actually recorded orgies involving Navy officers by putting secret cameras into the karaoke machines that he would install in the suites of hotels where he put on these events.
They just start stripping and, having sex right there. There was a mass orgy. That's how deep we were with the Navy. That's how close we were. We were touching skins.
I have a source who told me, a very good source, who told me that the US has been informed by China, a back channel way of talking between the countries, that they actually have some of this compromat. And so that's a possible way that some of this information, some of the sexual compromat, and also some of the classified details he had about ballistic missile defenses and ship schedules, may have fallen into Chinese hands.
And how high up in the Navy did this corruption go?
Well, it went very high, but the trials that are ongoing involve the Chief of Staff of the 7th Fleet, which is the very, very top of the big fleet in the Pacific, which is based in Japan, all the way down to petty officers. So it runs the whole gamut. Leonard's point is that there were also a lot of admirals for whom he provided prostitutes and dinners, and those admirals have not been sentenced, and they gave him what he calls top cover. So it meant that over the years, nothing happened. He was able to push back all those whistleblowers.
And at this point, who is the highest ranking U.S. Navy official who has either been indicted or convicted?
So one Navy admiral has gone to jail in this, Admiral Gilbo, Robert Gilbo. He's the first serving Navy admiral to go to jail in U.S. history, and he's out of jail already. He was actually convicted for false statement, I think, or about two investigators about what went on with Leonard. He did his time. He's done his time in jail, and he's out. There's another admiral, Admiral Bruce Lovelace, who has pleaded not guilty and is one of those 7 who's pleaded not guilty and whose trial is upcoming. So those are the most senior people caught up in this so far.
But bottom line, this is a huge scandal that most people really have never heard of, and the Navy's done a pretty good job of keeping quiet.
Yeah, the people just haven't heard of it. Not here in Singapore, where Leonard Francis lived in a $130 million mansion with 20 luxury cars, all thanks to the US taxpayer. Nobody knows about it. And I think in the US, maybe it's a little bit better known, but again, not very. And I think the main reason for that is that no one's been talking. So now, we hope with Fat Leonard to really shine a light on it and to sort of spark more of a discussion about what went wrong and how this could be stopped in the future.
Tom Wright, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
We asked the U.S. Navy for a comment, and a spokesperson said, given the ongoing criminal investigation, there would be no comment. Well, coming up next, the young man responsible for the Boston Marathon bombing that killed and maimed so many. Does he deserve the death penalty? Now in the hands of the Supreme Court. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network.
It was the video that shocked the nation. An unarmed black jogger, 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery, gunned down in broad daylight. The three-man charge will now stand trial. For live gavel-to-gavel coverage of the trial, subscribe to Law and Crime on YouTube TV today.
We turn now to a question of life or death. A jury found that convicted Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev should be sentenced to death, but a higher court overruled that decision. Now the case has made it to the Supreme Court, which heard arguments about it earlier this month. To get a better understanding of what's involved in this case, we're joined now by Michele McPhee, a journalist who covered the marathon bombing from the moment the bombs went off all the way through the trial, and she's written a book about it, Maximum Harm. And Robert Dunham, who's the executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center. Mr. Dunham, to start with you, the justices seem to be favoring, according to reports, reinstating the death penalty.
Yeah, I don't think that the oral argument was a surprise. The conservative justices on the court all seem to line up with the government's argument that the First Circuit had improperly overturned Tsarnaev's death sentence, and the liberal justices pretty much sided with the First Circuit, saying that the decision was appropriately granted.
And Michele McPhee, you covered the trial. The jury did vote the death penalty, but not all of the victims favored the death penalty, right?
No, I mean, it was pretty split down the middle. You know, you're talking about hundreds of people who were wounded, 260 people, 17 people who were left amputees, and another 3 that were murdered that day, along with the slain police officer. It was pretty split down the middle. And I think Martin Richards' family said it very eloquently. This is just going to be a rehashing of their wounds over and over and over again, because we all know that this is a long and drawn out and an expensive battle. In fact, it's so costly that the court has sealed the cost of both his trial and his ongoing appeal from the public.
And why do you think the jury finally did go with the death penalty, given the arguments by some of the victims not to do so?
I really think it was the demeanor of Dzhokhar himself in court. He, hardly expressed remorse. He did apologize, but his antics throughout the entire trial, I think, really infuriated not just the victims and the first responders who were affected directly. I think the jury was watching him doodle and scowl at people. And you may recall, Brian, because you were alongside me covering this trial, that Rebecca Gregory finally demanded, look at me. I want you to see the pain you caused me, the pain you caused my son. And he looked up and kind of smirked at her. In fact, you might recall there was a high-ranking police official who was so angry at the way that Dzhokhar was behaving that he whispered under his breath, maggot, as he walked off the stand. So I think Dzhokhar did not do himself any favors by his shenanigans during his trial.
Mr. Dunham, the Biden administration has put a moratorium on death sentences in federal cases. Why are they arguing here that the death penalty should be reinstated?
Well, I think that Justice Barrett got it wrong when she said that there was a moratorium on death sentences. What the government has actually done, what the Biden Justice Department has actually done, is temporarily halt seeking death warrants. The administration has not halted seeking new death sentences. It has not halted opposing capital appeals. So having said that, this still creates a problem, because President Biden is the first president to have said that he opposes the death penalty. And it seems contradictory for his Justice Department to be pursuing its own appeal of a death sentence that was overturned.
Michele McPhee, you've talked with a number of the families as they watch this go back and forth now. This is exactly what they feared, right? It would drag on forever and just for them recreate the horror of that terrible day.
And that's exactly right. So for them, every time he is featured on the news or these arguments go back and forth, again, they're reminded of what they lost. And I think the Richard family said it so eloquently that the best way for their family to move on is to allow him to just spend the rest of his life in prison. And even in prison, he has made somewhat of a mockery of the victims by suing the government, by suing the Bureau of Prisons. This is yet another expensive issue that he has tied the victims up in, and it was over wearing the white hat, identical to the one he wore when he smirked and dropped that backpack behind a row of children. So I think that they do have a valid point. I mean, I think if you take the death penalty argument off the table, this has just become a boondoggle for him. And I think he's enjoying being the center of attention again. And the major argument that the families have is, let's not give him that glare. Let's not put him back in the spotlight. Let's let him finish out his days as he does now, largely in solitary confinement, watching DirecTV alone.
And Mr. Dunham, finally, the Supreme Court ruling on this, that'll be the final word? That'll exhaust the appeals?
No, in fact, if the Supreme Court rules in favor of the prosecutors, the case will actually go back to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit to resolve a number of issues they didn't reach because they didn't need to. Once they overturned the death penalty, they didn't have to get to the other issues. And that could be problematic in a number of respects. First, there's a possibility that the First Circuit will grant relief again. And there's a very sensitive issue. One of the issues that was not resolved was whether the jurors were actually biased. And there are claims in front of the circuit in which the jury forewoman posted social media posts that referred to Mr. Tsarnaev as a piece of garbage. So that's a very strong indicator that there may be bias. And it's possible that the case goes back to the First Circuit and gets overturned again. And if the court rules against Mr. Tsarnaev and he loses the next stage of the appeals, there's also the habeas corpus stage after that. So we're looking at probably at least another decade before the case even finishes judicial review.
My goodness. All right. Well, Robert Dunham and Michele McPhee, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Very valuable insights. This case is far from over.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Coming up next, this week's winners and losers in the media. See if you agree with the editors of Mediaite about what they say about MSNBC's Rachel Maddow. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. Time now for this week's winners and losers in the media, as chosen by the editors of Mediaite. And we're joined by Aidan McLaughlin, who's the editor-in-chief of Mediaite, which, like the Law and Crime Trial Network, is part of the Dan Abrams media empire. Aidan, good to have you here tonight. You've chosen as your winner this week Rachel Maddow of MSNBC. Why?
Right. So Fox News gets a lot of attention for its ratings these days, and it is true that the network is the most watched on cable news by far. But one trend that has emerged in the past few months is that Rachel Maddow, who's long been the most watched host on MSNBC, is really the only person not on Fox News who draws big numbers. Now, we're talking since January, when CNN and MSNBC surged ahead of Fox News in the aftermath of the 2020 election. Since then, Fox News has pulled back ahead, is comfortably back on top, and CNN and MSNBC are experiencing lows. But when you look at just MSNBC and CNN, in prime time last week, MSNBC doubled CNN's ratings on Thursday and Friday. And that was really all thanks to Rachel Maddow, who draws much higher ratings than her fellow MSNBC primetime hosts, Chris Hayes and Lawrence O'Donnell. So the bottom line is that while CNN and MSNBC's ratings are way down in the Biden era, there's one non-Fox personality that still draws a large audience, and it's Rachel Maddow.
And as you know, Aidan, there were reports earlier this year that she has a new contract that allows her to skip the Daily Show and just do a show once a week. What about that?
That's right. So she signed a new contract. The Daily Beast reported that it was worth about $30 million, which is obviously a huge amount of money. The Daily Beast also reported that she's going to be ending her nightly show next year and will pivot to more of a weekly format. We'll be doing more stuff outside of just the nightly show for MSNBC, but she's still on with MSNBC through the 2024 election. So she's sticking around with the network, but she's not going to be doing the nightly show anymore, which is obviously a huge knock for MSNBC if they do go ahead with that plan. But they're still going to be paying her an enormous amount of money to remain at the network.
And let's talk about your loser this week, John Roberts of Fox News. Why John Roberts? Usually a pretty straight ahead, hard news reporter.
Usually, yeah. I think all of Twitter was waiting around this morning for the first Fox News host to suggest that the death of Colin Powell, who died of COVID despite being vaccinated, was proof or evidence that the vaccines don't work. I did not have my money on John Roberts to be that Fox News host, but he tweeted on Monday morning, and I have a tweet here. Yeah, you've got it up. The fact that Colin Powell died from a breakthrough COVID infection raises new concerns about how effective the vaccines are long term. As many people reminded Roberts after he tweeted that, it does not raise new questions about the vaccines. As we knew all along, vaccines are not 100% effective in preventing death from COVID. And I should also point out that Colin Powell is 84 years old when he died. He had myeloma, which is a cancer that weakens your immune system. Now, to John Roberts' credit, he deleted the tweet and posted a follow-up explaining that he supports vaccines. But I don't think the episode says anything good about the kind of information that people who watch Fox are getting about vaccines if one of their own anchors believes something like this.
And very quickly, even though they have their own mandates at Fox News, they continue to talk about the horrors of mandates.
That's true. To work at Fox News, you either have to get the COVID vaccine or submit to daily testing. That said, vaccine mandates are still a big outrage topic on Fox News, which is obviously a little touch of hypocrisy that doesn't really make sense to someone like me.
Indeed, but they continue to talk about it there. Aidan McLaughlin, thank you so much, Editor-in-Chief of Mediaite. And thank you all for joining us here this evening. We'll be back again next week. Thanks to our great team here at Law and Crime for getting us on the air and off the air every week.